Truck lots across America are sitting on more unsold inventory than at any point since the financial crisis. The Ram 1500 is averaging 162 days of supply nationally. The GMC Sierra is at 117 days. The Chevrolet Silverado is pushing 100. A Ford dealership outside San Antonio has so many F-150s, it rented a field across the street to park the overflow. The industry is calling it a demand problem. Analysts are calling it post-pandemic normalization. That is not what this is. This is a bill coming due. And the people holding it are the same ones who spent 2 years treating every working buyer in this country like a hostage. The showrooms are not quiet because the economy softened. They are quiet because of the buyers who kept those lots running. The contractors, the tradespeople, the farmers, the guys who put 100,000 miles on a truck for a living, did the math on a $65, $964 average transaction price, and a $773 average monthly payment and decided they were done. Not done with trucks, done with this. Here is what I am going to show you. How the pandemic markup era poisoned a customer relationship that took decades to build. How the debt structure wrapped around those inflated prices created a negative equity trap that has now locked 39% of all truck trade-in customers out of the market entirely. What the FTC found when it went through the transaction records of a major dealer group in April 2026. And the number that does not make the news, but should, the one that tells you this is not a slump the industry recovers from with a rebate program. This is a permanent shift in who can afford to participate in the new truck market at all. That number is the most important thing in this video. Stay with me until we get there. The truck market did not arrive at 162 days of unsold inventory by accident. It got there through a sequence of decisions that dealers made deliberately, at scale, across every brand and every zip code in the country, during a window when the buyer had no leverage and the dealer knew it. Go back to 2021. Semiconductor shortages gutted production across every major manufacturer. Lots that normally held 200 trucks were down to 20. In some markets, fewer. Buyers who needed a work vehicle could not wait out the shortage. A contractor cannot pause his business for 6 months while supply chains normalize. He needs a truck now. And dealers understood that perfectly. A Chevrolet dealer outside Houston applied $12,000 market adjustment stickers to every Silverado coming off the transport truck. Not selectively. Everyone. Ford dealers in the Dallas metro were running $15,000 adjustments on F-150s that had sold at MSRP for years. The pattern was identical regardless of brand or region because the logic was identical. The buyer has no alternative, so the price is whatever the buyer will pay before walking out. It was not just the window sticker. The finance offices ran the same play simultaneously. Paint protection packages billed at $5,100 that cost $40 to apply. Nitrogen tire fills at $1,000. Theft deterrent systems consisting of a barcode sticker on the door frame and a line item buried 11 pages into the contract. Products the buyer never requested, never saw demonstrated, and in many cases did not know existed until the loan was already funded. The dealers who had spent years building repeat business with loyal customers charged those customers the same markup as everyone else. The guy who had bought his last 4 trucks from the same salesperson got the $12,000 sticker. Loyalty meant nothing. The transaction was the only thing that mattered. Dealer profit margins in 2021 and 2022 hit the highest levels ever recorded in the history of the American car business, and not one of those markups was legally required. There was no mandate, no regulation, no supply contract forcing a dealer to charge over MSRP. Every single one was a choice made by people who assumed the shortage would last forever and the buyer would always come back. The shortage ended. The inventory came back. The buyer did not. That is not a market cycle. That is a consequence. Here is what the data actually shows about what happens to a dealer when the buyer stops walking through the door. Dealers do not purchase their inventory outright. They finance it through what the industry calls a floor plan loan, a line of credit extended by a bank or manufacturer captive lender to stock the big lot. Every truck sitting unsold is an active debt position. The interest meter runs from the day it arrives until the day it sells. At current floor plan rates, that cost runs between $30 and $50 per vehicle per day. A mid-sized dealership carrying 200 units of unsold inventory across a 4-month stretch burns through more than $700 000 in floor plan interest before a single truck moves. That is not an operating expense that shows up on a good quarter. That is the kind of sustained bleed that forces ownership decisions. Cut staff, defer maintenance, push the service department harder, or start taking losses on units just to clear the debt. Think about that for a second. A dealer sitting on 200 trucks that nobody is buying is paying the equivalent of rent on 200 properties simultaneously. Every morning the lot opens and every evening it closes with the same inventory and a larger interest balance than the day before. The Ram dealer on the outskirts of Scottsdale is carrying over 6 months of unsold stock right now. The sales staff on that lot named the back row the graveyard because the trucks parked there have been sitting long enough to collect a layer of desert dust on the hoods. Those are not vehicles moving toward a transaction. Those are depreciating assets accumulating floor plan interest while the dealer waits for a buyer who may not be coming. That is not a slow quarter. That is a business model running in reverse. The reason buyers stopped coming is not complicated. The math stopped working for them. And the math stopped working because of decisions made at every level of this industry. Manufacturer, dealer, and lender that prioritized short-term extraction over long-term market health. The average full-size pickup transaction in America right now sits at $65,964. That is not a loaded luxury configuration. That is the mean across every trim level sold in the country. The average monthly payment on that transaction is $773. 1 in 5 buyers who financed a truck in the first quarter of 2026 is paying over $1,000 a month. Over the last decade, blue-collar wages in America grew 38.7%. Truck prices grew 53.1%. The vehicle that the working buyer needs to do his job went up nearly 15 percentage points faster than his paycheck over the same period. The gap between what a tradesperson earns and what a work truck costs has been widening every model year for a decade. Nobody in Detroit called that a crisis while it was happening because the buyers kept signings. They signed longer loans, absorbed higher rates, rolled negative equity forward, and kept coming back because they needed the truck. Then they ran out of room. The negative equity data is where this becomes a structural problem rather than a pricing problem. Right now, 39% of all truck trade-ins in America are underwater. Nearly 1 in 3 people walking into a dealership to trade their current truck owes more on that loan than the truck is worth on the market. The average shortfall is $7,183. The average monthly payment for buyers carrying that negative equity is $932, the highest figure ever recorded in this segment. Let me show you exactly what that looks like in practice. A buyer comes into a GM dealer outside Nashville wanting to trade his 2022 Silverado. He purchased it during the shortage and paid $62,000, a number that included a market adjustment sticker and a finance office add-on package he was told was mandatory. He still carries $53 on the loan. The dealer appraises the trade at $39,000. That is $14,000 in negative equity. If he rolls that gap into a new truck loan, his monthly payment clears $100. He cannot absorb that number, so he shakes the salesman's hand, walks back across the lot, gets in his 2022 Silverado, and drives home. He is not cross-shopping at another dealership. He is out of the market entirely. And he is one of thousands of buyers running the same calculation in showrooms across the country every single week. The pandemic markups inflated the original purchase prices. The lenders wrote the loans against those inflated numbers. The trucks depreciated on a normal curve while the debt stayed exactly where it was written. The dealers built this trap with their own pricing decisions in 2021 and 2022. The trap is now the single largest reason nobody walking through their doors in 2026. That is not an economic cycle. That is a self-inflicted wound that is still bleeding. And this is where the story gets ugly. Because while all of this was happening on the sales floor, the finance offices were running a parallel operation that the FTC spent years documenting. In April 2026, the Federal Trade Commission settled a $75 million enforcement action against a major dealer group for deceptive pricings practices. When investigators pulled a statistically valid sample of that group's completed transactions, the numbers were not ambiguous. 88% of customers paid more than the advertised price. Not a majority, not most. 88 out of every 100 buyers who walked in responding to an advertised number drove home having paid a higher one. 68% were charged for add-on products they never requested and were never disclosed to during the negotiation. Gap insurance, tire and rim protection, paint sealant, interior coating, products baked into the contract after the price was agreed and before the paperwork was presented for signature. The buyer negotiated a number, believed the number, and signed a contract containing a different one. A Stellantis dealer network near Baltimore was running a practice the industry calls payment packing. The finance manager quotes a monthly payment. The buyer negotiates that payment down to a number they can live with. The buyer believes they have controlled the outcome. What the buyer does not know is that the payment they negotiated already included gap insurance, a tire and rim package, and a paint protection product folded into the base calculation before the negotiation started. The buyer reduced a number that was already inflated. They never touched the actual transaction cost. Think about that for a second. You sat across that desk for 2 hours. You pushed back. You walked out twice. You got the payment to a number you could manage. And you drove home having paid for 3 products you never agreed to purchase and never knew existed in your contract. This was not a single finance manager improvising on a slow afternoon. This was a documented, repeatable system operating across multiple locations within the same dealer group. The system worked exactly as it was designed to work. After the settlement, the FTC issued formal warning letters to 97 dealer groups nationwide. 97. The same industry that spent years treating the fine print as a profit center, is now receiving certified mail from federal regulators telling them the enforcement era has started. That is not a warning shot. That is the opening of a case that is going to run for years. But here is the part that should make you physically angry, because the FTC fine is a consequence. What comes next is permanent. In 2020, buyers earning under $100,000 a year represented 50% of the new vehicle market in this country. Half the market. Working people buying vehicles at every price point across every segment. By 2025, that number had dropped to 37%. 13 percentage points of the buyer base gone in 5 years. Meanwhile, buyers earning over $200, 0 cents a year grew from 18% of the market to 29% over the same period. The truck market did not lose a few customers during a slow cycle. It lost an entire economic class of buyer, and the mechanism that drove them out was not inflation or interest rates or global supply chain disruption. It was a decade of deliberate pricing decisions. Trim escalation, mandatory packages, pandemic markups, extended loan terms that moved the entry point on a work truck from a number a tradesperson could manage to a number that requires a professional income to absorb. In 2017, there were 36 new vehicle models available in America priced under $25,000. Today, there are 4, 36 to 4 in 7 years. The affordable vehicle did not get discontinued because nobody wanted it. It got discontinued because the margin on it was not interesting enough to the people making production decisions. The Toyota dealer in Bozeman, Montana is carrying 54 days of Tundra supply right now, the tightest inventory position of any full-size truck in the country. But the general manager of that store will tell you directly that the customer walking through his door today is not the customer who walked through 10 years ago. It used to be ranchers, outfitters, and contractors. buyers who needed a truck for actual work. The customers writing checks today are physicians, attorneys, and retired professionals buying a Tundra as a weekend vehicle. The truck did not change. The buyer did, because the buyer who actually needs a truck for work can no longer afford to be in that transaction. GM CEO Mary Barra stated publicly that General Motors has no intention of pursuing the $30,000 price point because the margin profile does not justify it. That is a direct statement from the leadership of the largest American automaker that the working buyer is not their customer anymore. The manufacturer made that decision. The dealer network made it worse. And the result is a market that now serves the top 30% of earners, while the people who built this country with their hands price shop for used trucks on Facebook Marketplace. That is not a market correction. That is a verdict on who this industry decided to serve and who it decided to abandon. These failures, the greed cycle, the debt trap, the permanent pricing shift, are a disaster for the working buyer who needed this market to stay accessible. But for the buyer who understands what is actually happening right now, the current environment is the most favorable negotiating position in years. Dealers carrying 162 days of Ram inventory and 117 days of Sierra inventory are not in a position to hold firm on price. Floor plan interest is running every single day those trucks sit. A dealer who has been carrying a unit for 4 months has already absorbed thousands in holding costs. That cost changes the negotiation. The buyer who walks in with a pre-approved loan from their own bank, a specific unit already identified, and a clean out-the-door number on paper has leverage that did not exist in 2021 and will not exist forever once. The manufacturers cut production to tighten supply. Ram's Q1 2026 results prove the opening. Ram brought back the Hemi V8 with a 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty and pushed transaction prices aggressively below the segment average. Sales jumped 25% in the first quarter, the brand's best Q1 since 2023. That is the blueprint for what works. A real engine, a real warranty, an honest price. The buyer responded immediately. Watch Ram inventory specifically over the next 60 days. If that 25% sales momentum holds and supply tightens on Ram lots while Ford and GM are still drowning, the discount window on those competitors gets wider before it gets smaller. Get your financing arranged before you walk onto any lot. Know the out-the-door number you are targeting before you sit down. Request a full itemized breakdown of every line in the contract before you sign anything. If a product appears on that contract that was not discussed during the negotiation, it was not disclosed and you are not required to accept it. The opportunity is real. The window is open right now. Do your homework before you walk through the door. Because the finance office is still the finance office regardless of what the sales floor looks like. Ford reports its next quarterly earnings in 7 weeks. If the inventory numbers that are visible on lots right now show up in those results, the way the supply data suggests they will, the incentive programs that follow are going to be the most aggressive Ford has run since the post-financial crisis clearance years. Buyers who understand how those programs work and what to look for in the contract are positioned to move fast when that window opens. Subscribe before those numbers drop, because the gap between the earnings announcement and the inventory response is where the real deals happen, and it closes faster than most buyers realize. The dealers who gouged the working buyer during the pandemic assumed the relationship would survive it. The empty showrooms and the 162-day supply numbers are the answer to that assumption. The buyer did the math. The buyer walked away. And the market the dealer network built by treating loyalty as a liability is exactly the market they deserve to be standing in right now.